In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a Boeing 707 carrying 6 experienced pilots and $1 million worth of painting simply vanished. No mayday call, no wreckage, no bodies, just silence. But here's where it gets stranger. The captain had already cheated death once before, surviving one of aviation's deadliest disasters where 123 people died. 6 years later, he disappeared into thin air. This is the story of Varig Flight 967. January 30th, 1979. 8:23 p.m. Tokyo. A Boeing 707 cargo plane thunders down the runway at Narita International Airport and lifts into the darkness. This is Varig Flight 967, and it's about to become one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries. The route is straightforward: Tokyo to Los Angeles, then Lima, and finally Rio de Janeiro. It's a journey Brazilian airline Varig has operated hundreds of times. The weather conditions are perfect: clear skies, no storms, no turbulence forecasted. Everything about this flight is routine, except it won't be. At the controls sits Captain Gilberto Araujo da Silva, 55 years old with over 23,000 flight hours. This man isn't some inexperienced pilot. He's a veteran. He's flown across the Pacific more times than he can count. With him are 5 other highly experienced crew members: first officers, second officers, flight engineers. These are professionals who know every procedure, every emergency protocol, every system on this aircraft. The Boeing 707 climbs to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet and heads east over the Pacific Ocean. Inside the cargo hold sits something extraordinary: 53 paintings by renowned Japanese-Brazilian artist Manabu Mabe, worth $1.24 million. But right now, nobody's thinking about the cargo. This is just another flight. At 8:45 p.m., 22 minutes after takeoff, Captain Da Silva's voice comes through the radio. He makes a routine position report to Tokyo Air Traffic Control. They're approximately 200 kilometers east-northeast of Tokyo. Altitude is stable at 35,000 feet. Airspeed normal. Fuel consumption on schedule. Everything is running like clockwork. His voice is calm, professional, unremarkable. This is standard operating procedure: checking in, confirming position, maintaining contact. Air traffic control acknowledges. Roger that. Flight 967. Those would be the last words anyone would ever hear from the aircraft. The next scheduled radio contact is set for 9:23 p.m., exactly 38 minutes later. The crew is supposed to check in with Oakland Air Route Traffic Control Center as they transition into international airspace over the Pacific. It's a mandatory communication. Pilots don't skip it. They can't skip it. It's built into every flight plan, drilled into every pilot's training. 9:23 p.m. arrives. Silence. The controllers wait. Sometimes there are minor delays. Radio interference. A pilot double-checking coordinates before transmitting. They give it a few minutes, standard procedure. 9:25 p.m. Still nothing. They try to raise Flight 967 on the radio. Varig 967, this is Oakland Center, do you copy? No response. They try again. Varig 967, please respond. Static. The controllers exchange glances. This isn't normal. They check with Tokyo Control. Maybe the plane is still on their frequency. Maybe there was a miscommunication about the handoff time, but Tokyo hasn't heard from them either. The last contact was that routine 8:45 p.m. check-in. Since then, nothing. Controllers start checking radar. They scan for the aircraft's transponder signal. That little electronic beacon that tells everyone exactly where the plane is, how high it's flying, its identification. Every commercial aircraft has one. It's always on. But there's no signal. The Boeing 707 has simply vanished from their screens. No distress call, no emergency transponder, no mayday, no panicked transmission saying they've lost an engine or they're experiencing rapid decompression or they're on fire. Nothing. This is the part that doesn't make sense. When aircraft have emergencies, even catastrophic ones, there's almost always some kind of warning. Pilots have seconds to react, and in those seconds, they reach for the radio. They squawk 7700, the universal emergency code. They say something, anything. But Flight 967? It's like someone flipped a switch and the plane just stopped existing. Search and rescue operations begin immediately. Within hours, one of the most extensive search operations in Pacific aviation history launches into action. Ships from multiple nations change course and steam toward the plane's last known position, that 200-kilometer radius east-northeast of Tokyo where Captain Da Silva made his final radio call. Japanese Coast Guard vessels, American naval ships, commercial freighters in the area. Everyone who can help is mobilized. Search aircraft take off from Japanese air bases, loaded with sophisticated scanning equipment. They fly grid patterns over the ocean, their crews straining to spot anything unusual on the water's surface. A floating suitcase, a seat cushion, an oil slick, debris, wreckage, bodies. Anything that would indicate a Boeing 707 came down in these waters. The search area is massive. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of square miles of open ocean. The Pacific isn't called the world's largest ocean for nothing, but they have to try. 6 men are out there somewhere. Maybe some survived. Maybe they're in life rafts waiting for rescue. Every hour counts. Days pass. They find nothing. Not a single piece of the aircraft. Not one fragment of wreckage floating on the surface. The ocean should be littered with debris if a plane crashed here. Aircraft don't just sink intact. They break apart on impact. Fuel tanks rupture, creating oil slicks that can be spotted from miles away. Cargo floats. Seat cushions are designed to be buoyant. There should be something, but there's nothing. The search expands. Maybe they're looking in the wrong place. Maybe the plane's last reported position was off. Maybe it continued flying after that 8:45 p.m. radio call and came down somewhere else. The search area grows to 500 kilometers, then 1,000 kilometers. Ships and aircraft are now scanning an area the size of some countries. Still nothing. Week after week, the searches continue. Families of the 6 crew members are holding on to hope. Brazilian newspapers are running daily updates. Varig is pouring resources into finding their aircraft and their men. The art world is desperate to know what happened to those $1.24 million worth of paintings. The Japanese government wants answers. The American authorities are involved because the plane was heading to Los Angeles. But the ocean keeps its secrets. No wreckage washes up on distant shores. No fishing boats stumble across floating debris. No passing ships report seeing anything unusual. It's as if the Boeing 707 simply flew into a void and ceased to exist. The searches gradually wind down. After weeks of finding absolutely nothing, authorities have to face reality. The plane is gone. And with 1979 technology, if they haven't found it by now, they're probably never going to find it. 6 months later, the official declaration comes. All 6 crew members are pronounced dead. Captain Gilberto Araujo da Silva, First Officer Ernie Peixoto Milius, Second Officer Antonio Brasileiro da Silva Neto, Second Officer Evan Braga Saunders, Flight Engineer José Severino Guzmão de Araújo, Flight Engineer Nicola Exposito. Gone. Their families can finally hold funerals, even though there are no bodies to bury. The 53 Manabu Mabe paintings are declared lost. Over $1 million in art just vanished into the Pacific. Varig Flight 967 becomes a cold case, filed away as an unsolved mystery. Another entry in the long list of aircraft that disappeared without explanation. But here's what makes this case truly haunting. Captain Da Silva wasn't supposed to be on that list. He'd already survived the impossible once before. 6 years earlier, he'd faced death and won. 123 people died, but he lived. And the story of what happened to him that day makes this disappearance even more chilling. July 11th, 1973. 6 years before Flight 967 vanished, Captain Gilberto Araujo da Silva was piloting Varig Flight 820 from Rio de Janeiro to Paris when a fire broke out in a rear lavatory. Smoke filled the cabin rapidly. With 134 people on board and the cockpit filling with smoke so thick he couldn't read his instruments, Da Silva made an emergency landing in an onion field 5 kilometers short of Paris-Orly Airport. Out of 134 people, only 11 survived. 123 passengers and crew died from smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning before the plane even touched the ground. Captain De Silva was one of the survivors. He was called a hero for avoiding a crash into populated Paris. But he lived through a nightmare, watching 123 people die while he was powerless to save them. That was 1973. 6 years later, he's back in the cockpit flying cargo across the Pacific, and then he vanishes without a trace. The question everyone asks is, what are the odds? What are the chances that a pilot who survived one of Brazil's deadliest aviation disasters would disappear in another unexplained incident just 6 years later? It seems impossible. Yet that's exactly what happened. But Flight 967 wasn't just carrying an experienced crew, it was carrying treasure. Inside that Boeing 707's cargo hold were 53 paintings by Manabu Mabe, one of the most celebrated artists in Brazil. And this is where the story takes another strange turn, because Mabe's life reads like a film script. He was born in Japan in 1924. His family emigrated to Brazil during the Great Depression, spending 50 days crossing the ocean in steerage, the cheapest, most miserable class of travel. They arrived in São Paulo with nothing. His father became a laborer on a coffee plantation. Young Manabu worked the fields, hauling 88-pound sacks of coffee. He taught himself Portuguese by kerosene lamp at night. He collected scraps of paper to draw on. He started selling hand-painted ties on the streets of São Paulo just to survive. But he kept painting. And in the 1950s, his abstract expressionist work started winning major international awards. In 1959, Time magazine declared it the year of Manabu Mabe, after he won top prizes at both the São Paulo Biennial and the inaugural Paris Biennial. By 1979, his paintings were hanging in major museums across the world. He was a legend. And in January 1979, 53 of his finest works were returning from a Tokyo exhibition, loaded onto Flight 967, worth $1.24 million, over $5 million in today's money. Here's what's strange about valuable art. It doesn't just disappear forever. When paintings get stolen, they eventually surface. Someone tries to sell them. They appear in private collections. Police recover them in raids. The black market for high-end art is massive, and people in that world keep track of missing pieces. But the 53 Manabu Mabe paintings from Flight 967, 45 years later, not a single one has ever been seen again. Not in an auction, not in a police seizure, not in some collector's secret vault. Nowhere. This sparked the first major theory about what happened to the plane. Art heist. Someone hijacked Flight 967 specifically to steal those paintings. Force the plane to land somewhere remote, take the cargo, and disappear. But it doesn't add up. You don't steal $1 million in art just to bury it forever. The whole point is to profit. And in 45 years, nobody has tried to sell even one painting. That theory doesn't work. So if it wasn't an art heist, what happened? So what actually happened to Brandon Swanson that night? 17 years later, nobody knows for certain, but theories have emerged, each trying to explain the impossible. The most widely accepted theory among law enforcement is that Brandon fell into the Yellow Medicine River or one of the surrounding waterways. The bloodhound evidence supports this. Brandon had mentioned hearing water during his call. The temperature that night was around 40 degrees, cold enough that if he'd fallen in, gotten out, and continued walking in wet clothes, hypothermia could have set in quickly. This theory suggests his body was carried downstream or became lodged somewhere that searchers simply haven't found yet. But after 17 years and extensive searches of the river system, many find this explanation unsatisfying. Another theory focuses on the landscape itself. Rural Minnesota is dotted with abandoned wells, cisterns, and underground drainage systems left over from old farms. Volunteer firefighter Darren Delzer studied the case extensively and noted something crucial. Right before Brandon yelled, "Oh shit," he'd said, "Not another fence," to his father. He was frustrated, climbing over fence after fence in the dark. Delzer suggests Brandon could have fallen into an unmarked well or cistern while trying to navigate the terrain. This would explain the complete lack of remains and why even cadaver dogs couldn't pinpoint a location. But it doesn't explain the scent trail leading to the river. Some online communities have proposed more exotic explanations. The fact that Brandon was walking toward lights that couldn't possibly have been Lind raises unsettling questions. What was he actually seeing? A few people have speculated about everything from alien abduction to supernatural intervention, pointing to the complete disappearance and the mysterious lights as evidence. While these theories lack any credible support, they demonstrate how deeply this case has captured public imagination. What came out of Brandon's tragedy was something concrete and important. His parents, Annette and Brian, refused to let their son's disappearance be in vain. They channeled their grief into action, lobbying the Minnesota State Legislature for change. In May 2009, Governor Tim Pawlenty signed Brandon's law with the Swanson family present at the ceremony. The law passed unanimously in the House and overwhelming in the Senate. It requires law enforcement agencies in Minnesota to immediately investigate missing persons cases involving adults, particularly when dangerous circumstances are suspected. Before Brandon's law, police could delay investigations of missing adults, assuming they'd left voluntarily. Brandon's case proved how deadly that assumption could be. The law has since saved lives by ensuring faster responses during those crucial first hours when someone goes missing. Today, Brandon Swanson remains on the FBI's missing persons list. His case is still open, tips still come in, his family still searches for answers. The fields around Porter, Minnesota still hold their secrets. Brandon would be 36 years old now. Somewhere out there, in those 122 square miles of farmland, rivers, and forgotten wells, the truth is waiting. Until that day comes, Brandon Swanson's disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. A young man who vanished mid-sentence while his father listened helplessly on the other end of the line.